The wind was sharp that evening, tugging at my shawl as I stood in front of the small white gate. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of the little gift. I carried a pair of knitted socks I had made for my grandson. The yarn was soft, pale blue, chosen because I remembered how my son used to love that color when he was small. I thought perhaps his son, my grandson, might feel the same. I pressed the doorbell, the chime echoing faintly inside the house. Through the curtained window I caught the blurred outline of movement, my daughter-in-law's figure, swift and decisive. For a fleeting second, hope bloomed. Maybe she would smile, let me in, allow me to hold the child I had not seen for weeks. But when the door opened, her expression was tight, her eyes cold. She did not look at me the way family should. "What are you doing here unannounced?" she asked, her voice clipped. I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. I just came by to bring these for the baby. I thought he might need them now that the nights are colder." Her gaze dropped to the socks in my hand as though they were contaminated. She didn't reach for them. Instead, she shifted her body, blocking the doorway so I could not see inside. "We've told you before, Mother. We don't want him wearing old-fashioned things. We have everything he needs." My heart sank. "They're just socks," I whispered. "I only wanted—" A sharp voice interrupted from deeper inside. "My son. Who is it?" For a moment my chest lifted with relief. Surely he would come. Surely he would welcome me in. I had raised him with these very hands, given up meals so he could eat, patched his school uniform late at night when my eyesight blurred. He would remember. But before I could answer, my daughter-in-law called back, "It's just your mother. I'll handle it." Handle it. As though I were a problem to be managed. She turned back to me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You really shouldn't keep coming like this. The baby needs a stable environment. We don't want him exposed to outdated ways." The words struck me like stones. Outdated, toxic, harmful. I had heard these whispers before, behind closed doors, slipping through the cracks when they thought I wasn't listening. But to hear them directly delivered without hesitation was something else entirely. My son's voice never came again. He didn't even step into the hallway. Perhaps he chose silence because silence was easier than confrontation. Perhaps he thought avoiding me would keep his marriage calm. But each second that passed was another knife twisting in my chest. I forced the socks into her hand, though she didn't grip them. They fell lightly against her palm before sliding onto the floor. I bent down quickly, my knees aching to pick them up. She didn't move to help me. She just watched. "Please," I murmured, my voice catching. "Tell him I was here. Tell him his mother only wanted to see her grandson." She said nothing. The door closed with a heavy thud, leaving me outside with the fading light and the sound of my own shallow breathing. I stood there for a long while, staring at the painted wood, as if it might open again out of pity. It did not. Behind that door was my family, my son, my blood, and the little boy I longed to hold. On this side stood only me, clutching socks that would never warm the small feet they were meant for. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I turned slowly, my heart a weight dragging against my ribs. I walked away, each step echoing with the bitter truth. I was no longer welcome in the very home I had prayed and sacrificed my whole life to build. And in that moment, a single question pressed itself into my thoughts, unshakable, cruel. When did a mother's love become something shameful? When I walked back to my small rented room that night, the silence pressed in on me like a second skin. The light bulb above my bed flickered, and the old fan groaned as it turned, but none of it could drown out the memories rushing back. Memories of a younger me, hands blistered, body weary, yet heart determined. Memories of the life I had given up so my son could stand where he does today. I had him when I was barely 20, too young to understand the weight of motherhood, but old enough to know there was no one else in the world who would fight for him like I would. His father was gone before the boy could even say his first word. Left one morning and never returned, leaving me with nothing but a single photograph and a mountain of debts. Everyone told me it would be impossible, that I should send the baby away to relatives or remarry quickly. But I couldn't. I held him against my chest and swore I would never let him feel abandoned the way I had. The years that followed were not kind. I worked in a garment factory by day, sewing until my fingertips bled, and scrubbed floors in other people's houses by night. My body ached, but whenever I saw his small face asleep on the thin mattress beside me, all the pain seemed worth it. There were nights I went hungry so he could eat an extra bowl of rice. Mornings when I patched the same school uniform for the 100th time, pretending the fabric was still strong. I still remember one winter when he was about 8. He needed new shoes. The old pair had holes that let in water every time it rained. I had no money left, only a pair of small gold earrings my mother had given me when I married. I took them to the pawn shop, the metal cool against my palm as I handed them over. With that money I bought him sturdy shoes and a used backpack. That night, when he tried them on, his face lit up with such joy that I forgot the sting of loss in my ears. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "Someday, Mama, I'll buy you new ones." I had believed him. School was his world, and I made it my mission to keep him there. When fees came due, I begged the school principal for more time. I took extra shifts, washed clothes for neighbors, even gathered scrap metal from construction sites. The exhaustion was crushing, but I carried it silently because his future was brighter than my comfort. And he did well. He was clever, quick with numbers, admired by teachers. I remember sitting at the back of the classroom during a parent meeting, my clothes plain, my hair tied back, feeling the stares of other mothers with manicured nails and soft hands. They whispered about me, about the absence of a father, about how long I could possibly hold everything together. I ignored them all, my eyes fixed on him. He was my pride. Years later, when he was accepted into university, I thought the years of struggle had finally been worth it. I remember sitting alone in my room, reading the acceptance letter over and over, tears soaking the paper. I sold the last piece of jewelry I owned, my wedding band, to pay for his dormitory fees. My fingers felt bare, but my heart was full. "Go," I told him as I saw him off at the bus station. "Go and live the life I could never have." He had hugged me tightly, promising to return every holiday. And he did, at first. He came back with stories of new friends, new professors, and a world that seemed so much larger than our narrow alleyway. He spoke with excitement, with dreams shining in his eyes. I cooked his favorite meals, fried fish the way he liked, and listened until the small hours. Those visits were the highlights of my life. Then came the day he told me about her, his future wife. His face glowed when he spoke her name, and I was happy for him truly. She seemed polite enough the first time we met, though her smile never reached her eyes. I told myself it didn't matter. As long as my son was happy, I could learn to accept anything. When they married, I helped as much as I could, though my savings were little. I borrowed money to buy them a gift, new furniture for their apartment. It was the first time in many years I had gone into debt again, but I told myself it was worth it. The wedding was beautiful, full of laughter and promise, and for a while, I believed I was gaining a daughter, not losing a son. But as the months turned to years, subtle changes crept in. Calls that used to come weekly turned into monthly, then less. Invitations to visit became rare. And when my grandson was born, I thought my world would bloom again. To hold the child of my child felt like a blessing I had long prayed for. I remember the first time I held him, tiny, warm, smelling of milk and life itself. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered promises into his ear. Promises that I would love him as fiercely as I had loved his father. In that moment, I thought all the sacrifices of my youth had been worth it. I could not have known then that this love, too, would be used against me. At first, nothing seemed unusual. When my daughter-in-law came home from the hospital with the baby, she smiled politely, thanked me for helping prepare porridge, and let me cradle the child for a few minutes before retreating to her room. I told myself this distance was normal. A young mother needed space, and I had always been careful not to impose. I visited whenever I could, bringing small meals I had cooked, stews that smelled of ginger and pepper, dishes my son had loved as a child. I thought it would help her recover, that she would see I wanted only to make life easier. But each time I arrived, she would wrinkle her nose slightly, as if the scent of my food was offensive. One afternoon, I placed a bowl of chicken soup on the table. She glanced at it briefly and said, "Thank you, Mother, but the doctor said oily food isn't good. We'll stick to the diet I've prepared." I froze. This is lean meat, very light. When my son was small, I always... She cut me off. "Yes, but times are different now. We know more about nutrition." Her words were not cruel on the surface, but the sharpness beneath them stung. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodded, and carried the bowl back home, eating it alone that night. Small disagreements like that became routine. When I suggested bathing the baby at a certain hour, she insisted her schedule was better. When I hummed lullabies my mother had once sung to me, she frowned and whispered that too much noise disturbs his sleep. Even the way I held him my hands steady from decades of hard labor was criticized. "Support his head differently," she would say. "You're making him uncomfortable." I obeyed, though inside I screamed at the injustice. I had raised her husband, my son, from infancy. Hadn't I done something right? But my words stayed locked in my chest, because to speak them aloud would risk an argument, and arguments in their household were dangerous. I noticed, too, how my son began to shift. At first he tried to mediate, to laugh off the tension. "She's just being cautious," he told me one evening when I complained gently. "Don't take it personally." His tone was soft, but I could sense his unease. Slowly, over weeks, his voice grew quieter whenever his wife spoke, as though he too feared her disapproval. The change was subtle, like water eroding stone. He stopped asking me to babysit, though I had cleared my evenings for that very purpose. He stopped eating the meals I sent, claiming they already had too much food. And once, when I arrived without notice, hoping to surprise them with fresh fruit, my daughter-in-law met me at the door and said firmly, "Next time, please call first." Her eyes told me it wasn't a request. From then on, I hesitated each time I thought of visiting. I would stand in my small room, staring at the basket of fruit or the pot of soup I had prepared, and wonder if they would even open the door. Many times I turned back before reaching their house, ashamed of my own fear. One evening, after a long day at the market, I decided to try again. I brought a soft blanket I had sewn myself, decorated with tiny blue stars. It had taken me weeks, sewing late into the night with dim light, each stitch carrying my longing to be part of my grandson's world. When I handed it to my daughter-in-law, she touched the fabric with her fingertips, then placed it back in my arms. "We appreciate the effort, but we've already bought organic blankets from the store. They're safer for the baby." Her words, so smooth, cut deeper than any knife. She did not even hide the dismissal. I held the blanket against my chest, pretending it was enough, but the humiliation burned in my throat. Later that evening, I sat on a bench near their apartment building, watching as lights flickered on in the windows. Through the glass I could see shadows moving, my son lifting the baby, my daughter-in-law adjusting something on the table. The faint sound of laughter drifted down. It should have warmed me, but instead it hollowed me out, because I was not part of it, because joy was happening inside while I sat alone outside. The unease grew heavier when I overheard her speaking one day as I passed by the open window. I hadn't intended to listen. I was only delivering a bag of diapers I had bought with my meager savings. But her voice carried clearly. "She means well, but she doesn't understand. Her ways are toxic. If we let her spend too much time with him, he'll pick up old habits. You know how children are, impressionable." I stopped breathing. The word toxic echoed in my ears, sharp and unforgiving. For a moment I pressed myself against the wall, hoping I had misheard. But then I heard my son's voice, low and hesitant. "She's still my mother," he said. "Yes, and I respect that," she replied smoothly. "But we need to protect our child. You want what's best for him, don't you?" Silence. Then, quietly, he said, "Of course." The diaper bag nearly slipped from my hand. I walked away quickly, tears blurring the streetlights into smears of gold. I had thought my son would defend me, that he would remember the countless nights I stayed awake for him, the sacrifices carved into my very skin. But his silence told me everything. He was choosing her comfort over mine. That night, lying on my thin mattress, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I had already lost him. If the boy who once clung to me at the bus station, who once promised to buy me new earrings, had been replaced by a man too afraid to stand against his wife. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would improve. But deep down, a small voice whispered the truth. I was being slowly pushed out of their lives. And the cruelest part was that I could see it happening, step by step, yet could do nothing to stop it. The days turned into weeks, and the invisible wall between us grew higher. At first it had been small things, comments about food, disapproval about lullabies. But now, it was as though my very presence unsettled them. I felt it every time I crossed their threshold, the air heavy with tension, my daughter-in-law's polite smile stretched thin like glass ready to shatter. One Sunday morning I decided to visit again. I had been up since dawn, boiling a pot of sweet porridge made with lotus seeds and red beans, a recipe my mother once prepared when I was a child. It was gentle, nourishing, perfect for a young family. Carrying it carefully in a covered pot, I climbed the familiar steps to their apartment, rehearsing in my head the words I would say, simple, harmless, offering no reason for criticism. When the door opened, my grandson's cry echoed from inside. My heart leapt. Instinctively, I moved forward, eager to soothe him, but my daughter-in-law stepped aside only partially, her body angled like a barrier. "He's fussy today," she said quickly. "Better if you don't come in." I blinked, clutching the pot. "I could help, just for a little while. You need to rest." She shook her head. "No, it's fine, we have our methods." Her eyes flicked to the pot in my hands. "What's that?" "Just porridge," I answered softly. "For you all. I thought it might." "We don't eat that kind of thing anymore," she cut in. "Too much sugar. You should keep it for yourself." The rejection, so casual, cut deeper than outright cruelty. My hands trembled as I lowered the pot to the floor. "At least take it," I whispered. "It's already made." She sighed as though weary of my persistence, then called over her shoulder, "Darling, your mother is here." My son appeared in the hallway. For a moment my breath caught. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, but he was still my boy. I smiled, relief washing over me. "I made porridge," I said quickly. "Maybe you could try." His eyes flickered toward his wife before settling back on me. Something unreadable passed across his face. "Mom," he said gently, "you really don't need to keep bringing food. We're managing." "I know, but—" "It's not necessary," he interrupted, his voice firmer. The silence that followed was unbearable. I looked down, seeing the porridge cooling at my feet. My grandson's cry grew louder inside, a reminder of what I was being denied. Every part of me longed to step past them, to hold him, to prove that my love was not harmful, but the doorway remained blocked. I forced a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Of course, I understand." He nodded once, quickly, as if relieved the conversation was over. "We'll call you when it's convenient," he said, then disappeared back into the apartment without another word. The door closed, leaving me alone with the pot. I stood there for a long moment, the corridor empty around me, until a neighbor appeared at the far end, carrying groceries. She glanced at me, then at the untouched porridge, and offered a sympathetic smile. That look pity was almost worse than rejection. I lifted the pot again, my arms heavy, and walked away with slow steps, each footfall echoing my shame. That evening I sat in my room staring at the pot, untouched. I could not bring myself to eat it. The taste had turned bitter in my mind. Instead, I carried it to the alley and left it on the steps where stray cats often wandered. Watching them lap at the porridge under the dim streetlight, I felt tears sting my eyes. Even animals accepted what my own blood had refused. The next time I saw my son was at a family gathering, a distant cousin's wedding. I had dressed carefully, wearing my best blouse, and brushing my hair until it gleamed. My heart lifted when I spotted him across the hall, his wife at his side, my grandson nestled in her arms. I hurried forward, weaving through the crowd. But when I reached them, my daughter-in-law shifted the baby higher on her hip, turning his face away from me. "He's sleeping," she said curtly. I reached out anyway, just to touch his tiny hand. My son stepped subtly between us, his movements smooth but unmistakable. "Mom, let's not disturb him," he murmured. The words froze me where I stood. Around us, relatives laughed, glasses clinked, music swelled. Yet in that noisy room, I felt an unbearable silence pressing down. I lowered my hand, nodding as though in agreement, though inside something cracked. Throughout the evening I remained on the periphery, watching as other relatives cooed over the baby, holding him, kissing his cheeks. Not once was he placed in my arms. I smiled when people glanced my way, hiding the storm inside me, but every moment was torture. Later, when the festivities ended and the guests streamed out into the night, I caught a final glimpse of my son buckling his child into a stroller. His wife leaned close, whispering something, and he laughed softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. That laughter, once mine alone to nurture, now excluded me entirely. I walked home under the glow of street lamps, the air damp with drizzle. Each step felt heavier than the last, my chest tight with a grief I could not name. For years, I had believed sacrifice would guarantee love, that giving everything would mean I could never be forgotten. But as I trudged through the rain, the realization struck with brutal clarity. Love does not always return where it was born. And that night, for the first time, I admitted the truth to myself. My son was slipping away, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with quiet rejection, death by 1,000 silences. The morning the sky turned the color of bruised fruit, I decided I would not be turned away again. The forecast had promised rain, and I had woken before dawn to steam congee with minced pork and scallions, the way my son liked when he was a boy, not heavy, not oily, just warm enough to sit in the belly and soften a hard day. I packed it into a thermos, wrapped a dry towel around it, and tucked a small paper crane into the pocket of my coat for my grandson. A silly token, perhaps, but I had folded it carefully, pressing each crease with my thumbnail the way I used to when my son was small and storms frightened him. On the bus, my hands would not keep still. I counted the stops out of habit, watching the city shiver itself awake, shutters rattling open, a broom swishing across wet pavement, the hiss of kettles in breakfast shops. I told myself I was going to help, not to intrude. A mother did not need permission to bring warmth to her child. A grandmother did not need permission to be near her blood. By the time I reached their building, the rain had started in earnest, fat drops tapping the umbrella like impatient fingers. I climbed the stairs because the elevator had been out of order all week, and at the third-floor landing I could already hear the thin, frantic cry of my grandson cutting through the hallway like a wire. Instinct overtook me. I hurried the last flight and rang the bell. My daughter-in-law opened the door with a baby carrier strapped to her front, our boy's face flushed and wet with tears. She was pale from lack of sleep, hair pinned in a careless knot, dark crescents beneath her eyes. For a blink, something like relief flickered across her face. Then she saw it was me. Her mouth flattened. "What is it?" she asked, adjusting the carrier strap as the baby squirmed. "I heard him," I said quietly, ignoring the way my heart hammered. "Let me hold him a moment. I brought congee and a towel." The rain— "We're fine," she said. The baby let out another sharp wail that made my chest ache. "He's overtired. I can walk him," I offered. "Just up and down the hall, 2 minutes." I held out my arms, palms open, the way one approaches a skittish bird. "No." She stepped back, an inch that felt like a mile. "We have a routine." Behind her, my son appeared in the doorway to the bedroom, buttoning his cuffs with the clumsy quickness of someone late for work. He glanced at me, then at his wife. "Mom," he said, voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I came to help," I said, lifting the thermos slightly, as if the sight of it might conjure the boy he used to be, the boy who would run at the smell of scallions and steam. "It's raining. I thought—" "We don't need help." My daughter-in-law's tone was crisp enough to slice. "I've told you, we're implementing a sleep schedule. Outside stimulation interferes." The baby hiccuped, then cried harder. The sound went through me like a key turning a lock I had been bracing with my whole body. "Please," I said, "he just needs a warm shoulder." Without thinking, I reached forward the smallest bit, only my hands, only a breath into their space. My daughter-in-law recoiled as if I had struck her. Her palm came up, not touching me, but barring me like the hard edge of a gate. "Do not," she said, each word sharp and separate. "Do not touch him." The hallway tilted. My son froze, cuff unfastened, mouth opening and closing once, twice. He took a step, as if toward me, then half turned toward his wife instead. The baby's cry climbed another octave, and something in me broke not a violent snap, but a long, tearing sound like fabric giving way at last. "I raised you without sleep schedules," I told my son, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Without help, without anyone. And you grew, you lived, you laughed." I swallowed the heat of humiliation rising in my throat. "I am not poison." He closed his eyes a moment. When he opened them, he looked older than he ought to at his age. "Mom," he said gently, "this isn't about you. It is always about me." I said before I could stop myself, the words small and bare in the humid air. "Because you are me. Because your blood is mine. Because that child is—" "Enough," my daughter-in-law snapped. The word cracked in the corridor, startling the baby into a hiccuping silence. You show up unannounced, you ignore our boundaries, and then you make this about your sacrifices. We have asked you again and again to respect our choices. Respect? I repeated, blinking rain out of my lashes, though I was under the overhang now. I have made nothing but respect for years. I have bent myself until I couldn't stand. I have swallowed my words until my mouth tasted of metal. Lower your voice, my son said quickly, glancing toward the neighbor's doors. Please. The request shamed me more than if he had shouted. I softened, pulled my coat tighter, felt the paper crane crumple in my pocket. I am not here to fight, I said. Let me carry him while you dress. I will stay in the hall. My daughter-in-law studied me with careful clinical detachment, as if weighing a set of numbers. You can stay for 5 minutes, she said at last. You will not hold him. You will not kiss him. You will not sing to him. You will not give him anything to eat or drink. You will not— Please, I said, my mouth dry. I understand. She stepped aside just enough for me to enter the narrow strip of their entryway. The scent of laundry powder hung in the air, mixed with the milky sweetness of the baby and the faint iron of rain-soaked clothing. My son vanished into the bedroom again. With practiced hands, my daughter-in-law tightened the carrier straps and rocked on her heels, tiny bounces. The baby's lashes were stuck together with tears. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. I stood there, hands at my sides, as close to him as I had been in weeks, and did nothing. The 5 minutes stretched like rubber. I could feel each second resisting. At last, the baby's cries weakened into a fretful hum. My daughter-in-law glanced at the clock. Time's up, she said. A small, senseless panic rose in me. Just one touch, I whispered. His hand. One finger. No, she said. Boundaries. Something bright and reckless flared under my breastbone. Boundaries, I echoed. Yes, I know about boundaries. I slept by the door when he had a fever so I could hear his breathing. I sold my wedding band when he needed textbooks. I learned to sew so I could piece together a uniform that wasn't shameful. I have kept the boundary of my hunger outside his plate, the boundary of my fatigue outside his bed, the boundary of my loneliness outside his happiness. Do not teach me about boundaries. Her eyes flashed and then cooled to polished stone. You keep score like a ledger, she said. Motherhood isn't a debt anyone owes you. The words landed cleanly, almost beautifully, and still they cut to the bone. My son reappeared, tie crooked, eyes moving between us like a trapped animal's. We're running late, he said. Take the thermos, I said, thrusting it toward him. It's congee, light, warm. We don't— my daughter-in-law began. I'll take it, my son said quickly, surprising both of us. He reached for it and our fingers brushed. His skin was warm. The contact steadied me and undid me all at once. He set the thermos by the shoe rack as if it might explode. We'll have it later, he said, not meeting my eyes. I should have left then. I should have bowed to the inevitable, folded my umbrella, and walked back into the rain with whatever was left of my pride. Instead, I heard myself say softly, Let me carry the stroller to the curb. The stairs are wet. My daughter-in-law hesitated only for a heartbeat, but I saw it. The calculation, the cost, benefit, the faint quiver of exhaustion that made her want to say yes. She unclipped the baby, handed my son a diaper bag, then wheeled the empty stroller into the hall. Fine, she said, just to the curb. Don't touch anything. I won't, I promised. I took the stroller carefully, my knuckles whitening around the handle. The rubber wheels were slick. The stairwell smelled of concrete and damp paint. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of their shoes and the baby's uneven breaths. On the second landing, a neighbor's door opened the old man with the limping dog, and he nodded at me. Careful, he said, pointing his chin at the wet step that always caught the unwary. I know, I said, and eased the stroller down the last set. Outside, the rain had steadied into a curtain, fine enough to miss the skin. I positioned the stroller under the awning, clicked the brake, then turned to take the diaper bag from my son so he could carry the baby more safely. He shifted his weight, uncertain, and in that small tangle of hands and straps, something went wrong. The stroller rolled an inch. The brake hadn't caught cleanly. The wheel hit a dip in the concrete and twisted. The frame shuddered, empty but noisy, and my daughter-in-law gasped as if I had thrown it into the street. What are you doing? She snapped, eyes blazing. She clutched the baby closer as if to shield him from me. "You could have hurt him. He wasn't in it," I said, heart slamming. "The break." "You always have an excuse," she said. "Always. You don't listen. You don't respect. You just push." Her voice rose, and a couple walking past turned their heads. My son lifted a hand. "Let's calm down," he murmured, but his voice trembled. I felt the old mortal fear, then the fear of being the spectacle, of being the woman the street pities. I straightened my shoulders and spoke as evenly as I could. "I'm trying to be part of my family." "You are trying to control my family," she shot back. "Our family, your time is over." The words were too clean, too final. They made the rain sound louder, the traffic harsher, the world suddenly cold. I looked at my son, pleading with my eyes for him to refute it, to say anything that would make the ground feel less like it was giving way. He licked his lips, glanced at the people who had slowed to listen, and chose the smaller fire. "Mom," he said softly, "maybe it's better if you give us space. For a while." "For a while," I repeated. The phrase tasted like metal. "How long is a while?" No one answered. The baby began to fuss again, and my daughter-in-law adjusted her grip with a practiced, proprietary motion. She nudged the stroller away from me with her foot, as if moving a chair that blocked her path. I felt something old and fierce rise in me, then a mother wolf thing with thinning fur and a mouthful of broken teeth. "He is my grandson," I said, not loud but with a gravity that surprised even me. "You can build a palace of rules around him, but there is a door you cannot lock." "Watch me," she said. It might have ended there, a hard line scored in wet concrete, but fate, or foolishness, had one more turn to make. A sudden gust drove rain like needles under the awning, and in the scramble to shield the baby, the diaper bag tipped. The zipper gave. A thin folder slid out and fell at my feet, papers skittering like pale fish. Reflex moved me. I bent, gathered the dampened sheets, and before I could hand them back, my eyes had taken in a line of text bolded at the top, a name and a date, and a header that made no sense until it made all the sense in the world. Parental Access Guidelines, Primary Guardian Authorization. My breath stopped. Another page. Schedules. Another visitation limits. And there, in clean bullet points, the words that turned the bruised sky black. Contact with paternal grandmother. Not recommended. I looked up, clutching the papers. My daughter-in-law's face had gone still, her fury cooling into something flat and impenetrable. My son's expression emptied, as if every trace of himself had been erased and rewritten. "What is this?" I asked, though I could hear my own voice as if from the far end of a tunnel. "Give those back," she said. "What is this?" I asked again, the rain sheeted in my ears, the city dissolving at the edges. She took one step forward, chin lifted. "It's how we keep our child safe." My son did not speak. Somewhere a horn blared, somewhere a bus exhaled. The paper in my hands bled rain and ink, and a final, steadying quiet opened inside me like the dark at the bottom of a well. I drew a breath that hurt. "From me?" I said. Neither of them answered. The rain fell harder. The stroller wheel ticked against the concrete, a metronome measuring out the seconds of a life I no longer recognized. "Take the papers," I said at last, and held them out with hands that did not shake. "But you will explain." My daughter-in-law reached to snatch them. I did not let go. "Now," I said, and for the first time since the baby was born, she blinked. "Fine," she whispered. "Inside." She turned toward the door without looking back. My son hesitated, rain pooling in the dip of his collarbone, as if a man could drown standing up. I stared at the doorway, the same doorway that had rejected me again and again, and stepped after them. The paper crane crushed flat in my pocket, the thermos cooling by the shoe rack, the truth waiting like a blade beyond the threshold. The door clicked shut behind us with a finality that sent a shiver through my spine. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of lavender detergent and formula milk, a mixture that should have been comforting but now carried the tang of hostility. The rain outside muffled into a dull roar against the windows, sealing us in together like unwilling actors trapped on a stage. My daughter-in-law set the baby down in his bassinet, fussing with the blanket as if she could tuck away the tension along with him. My son hovered near the kitchen, his tie still crooked, hands restless at his sides. I remained standing in the entryway, the damp papers pressed against my chest. "Explain!" I said. My voice was low, controlled, but it vibrated with the force of everything I had swallowed until now. My daughter-in-law straightened, smoothing her hair back. It's nothing unusual. Many families draw up guidelines. It keeps everyone clear about roles, about expectations. Guidelines, I repeated. My gaze dropped to the bold print bleeding through the wet pages. Not recommended. The words blurred but seared all the same. You call this clarity? You call this respect? It's protection, she replied, her chin lifting. For him, for our child. I turned toward my son. And you agreed to this? He shifted, his eyes darting between us. Mom, please. You're misunderstanding. It's just precautionary language. It doesn't mean you're being cut out completely. Not recommended, I said, each syllable deliberate. That is not precaution. That is judgment. That is condemnation. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I knew from his boyhood when he was caught in a lie. It's just paperwork, he muttered. Paperwork. The word cracked in my throat. You would sign away your mother with paperwork? The baby stirred, whimpering softly, and for a moment all three of us froze. My daughter-in-law hurried to the bassinet, patting him gently until he settled. Then she turned back, her face carved from stone. You don't understand boundaries, she said. You barge in unannounced, you undermine my parenting, you cling to outdated methods. This isn't about us, it's about what's best for him. What's best for him? I felt the old fury rising, the kind I had buried under years of sacrifice. What's best for him is to know where he comes from, to know his grandmother's arms, to hear the lullabies that raised his father into the man you married. What's best for him is love, not rules written in ink by someone desperate to erase me. Her eyes narrowed. Love is not license. Love does not mean you get to ignore the parents' decisions. I stepped forward, my wet shoes squeaking against the polished floor. And parenthood does not mean you get to erase the past. It does not mean you cut away the roots because you want to claim the tree alone. Enough! My son burst out, his voice louder than I had heard in years. His hands clenched at his sides, his face tight with panic. Stop this! Both of you! I froze, my heart hammering. The last time he had raised his voice to me was when he was a teenager, angry about rules, about curfews. Then his anger had been brief, hot, but still tethered to respect. Now, it felt different. It felt like a wall. Do you know what it does to me? I said quietly. To hear my own child shout at me in his wife's defense? He flinched, but the wall remained. I'm not choosing sides. Yes, I whispered. You are. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady drip of rain against the balcony rail. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms, her body angled protectively toward the bassinet. My son would not meet my eyes. I laid the damp papers on the table, spreading them carefully as though they were sacred text instead of instruments of betrayal. The ink bled into the wood grain. My fingers traced the lines of authority, the columns of permission and denial. This is not clarity, I said. This is exile. Neither of them spoke. The baby shifted again, letting out a soft sigh that seemed to echo the emptiness between us. At last, I drew myself upright, my back aching but unbent. I will not beg to exist in my grandson's life. If you wish to make me a shadow, then so be it. But remember, shadows do not vanish. They follow. My daughter-in-law's lips tightened, but she said nothing. My son closed his eyes, a man torn apart yet still too weak to act. I picked up my umbrella, heavy with rain, and turned toward the door. My reflection in the darkened glass showed a woman older than I remembered, worn and weary, but still standing. As I stepped back into the storm, the papers lay behind me on the table, curling at the edges as the ink continued to blur truth bleeding into silence, silence bleeding into betrayal. And with each step down the stairwell, I felt the certainty harden inside me. This was no longer misunderstanding, no longer small quarrels. This was war, declared in whispers and sealed with signatures. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. My niece, bright and ambitious, had graduated from university, and the family gathered at a rented banquet hall to honor her achievement. I arrived early, wearing the best dress I owned, a navy blue piece I had kept carefully folded in my wardrobe for years. I pinned my hair neatly, polished my shoes until the leather shone, and carried a small wrapped gift, a silver pen, modest but chosen with pride. As I walked into the hall, the air buzzed with laughter, the clatter of dishes, the warm hum of relatives reuniting. Children ran between tables, their laughter ringing like bells. I smiled faintly, though my stomach twisted, because I knew they would be here too. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandson. I spotted them near the head table, surrounded by cousins and aunts. My daughter-in-law glowed in a tailored dress, her hair flawless, her smile wide as she accepted compliments. My son stood at her side, holding the baby, who wore a tiny bow tie that made my chest ache with longing. I approached slowly, my gift clutched in both hands. A few relatives greeted me warmly, asking after my health, pulling me into conversation, but my eyes stayed fixed on my family, my blood, my heart. When I finally reached them, I offered a soft greeting. "Hello, you all look wonderful today." My son glanced at me quickly, then down at his child. "Hello, Mom," he said, polite, neutral, already looking away. My grandson wriggled in his arms, letting out a small squeal. Instinctively, I reached forward, hands trembling, wanting only to brush his cheek, to let him know I was there. But before I could touch him, my daughter-in-law stepped smoothly between us. Her smile did not falter, but her eyes were sharp. "Careful," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "We're being cautious about germs. The doctor said outsiders shouldn't touch him too much." The word struck me like a slap. Outsider. I froze, my hands suspended awkwardly in the air. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. A few pairs of eyes turned toward us, curious, some sympathetic, others simply entertained by drama unfolding like a play. "I'm not a stranger," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I'm his grandmother." Her smile widened, brittle as glass. "Yes, of course, but we have to follow the rules, don't we?" Laughter bubbled at another table, unrelated but cruel in its timing. My face burned. I lowered my hand, folding it tightly against the other to hide the trembling. My niece came over then, radiant in her gown, pulling me into an embrace. "I'm so glad you came, Auntie," she said warmly. For a moment, I felt anchored again, seen. I handed her the small gift, murmuring my congratulations, and she hugged me once more before moving on to greet other relatives. But the damage had already been done. I could feel the whispers at my back, the pitying glances. I sat alone at a table near the corner, the noise of celebration swirling around me like a storm I could not enter. From across the room, I watched my grandson bounce on his father's knee, laughing, clapping tiny hands. Each sound of joy pierced me. I longed to join, to share in the simple sweetness of family. Instead, I sipped lukewarm tea, my throat tight, my eyes burning. As the evening wore on, I gathered my courage once more. When dessert was served, I rose and walked to their table again. My hands shook, but I kept my voice steady. Could I hold him for just a minute? Just one. The room seemed to hush, or perhaps it was only in my ears. My son hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously between me and his wife. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, her arm draped protectively around the baby's shoulder. "I already told you," she said. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "We don't think it's good for him." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. "Then let me sit near him, that's all." She shook her head, her eyes glittering with something like triumph. "I think it's better if you keep some distance." Around us, forks clinked. Conversations faltered. Relatives exchanged uneasy looks, but no one spoke. Not even my son. I returned to my corner table, each step heavier than the last, the echo of her words pounding in my ears. "Keep some distance." That night, as I walked home under the dim glow of street lamps, I replayed the scene over and over. The way she had said it in front of everyone. The way my son had stayed silent. The way my grandson's laughter had filled the air while my arms remained empty. It was not only rejection anymore, it was humiliation. Public, deliberate, undeniable. And for the first time, I wondered if this was not simply about rules or parenting philosophies. For the first time, I wondered if she wanted me erased completely. The summer sun was merciless the day of my grandson's first birthday. The air shimmered above the asphalt, and even the shadows seemed to sweat. I had spent weeks preparing for the celebration in my own quiet way. Though no one had asked me, I sewed a tiny vest from soft cotton, embroidered with blue thread to match his eyes. I baked a honey cake the night before, my fingers clumsy with age but steady with love, just as I had baked countless birthday cakes for my son when he was small. When I arrived at the party venue, a bright, rented cafe hall filled with balloons and streamers, I carried the wrapped vest and the cake carefully. Children ran about, their shouts bouncing against the walls. Tables overflowed with catered dishes, platters of glossy fruit, sparkling drinks. My daughter-in-law stood near the center, radiant in a pastel dress, directing waiters with a confidence that made her look like the hostess of a grand banquet. My son hovered close, adjusting decorations, nodding at her every instruction. I lingered at the edge, my gifts heavy in my arms. When I approached, forcing a smile, my daughter-in-law glanced at me, her lips curving politely but her eyes unreadable. "You came," she said, as if it were unexpected. "Of course," I replied softly. "He is my grandson." I offered the cake first. She looked at it for a long moment, then shook her head lightly. "We already have 3 cakes, professional ones, from a bakery." I felt the heat creep up my neck. Then perhaps this could be just for him, later, at home. Her smile did not waver. "We'll see." She turned, already calling instructions to someone else. I clutched the vest then, holding it out to my son. "I made this, for him to wear today." He took the package hesitantly, unwrapping it while the noise of the party swelled around us. The vest unfolded, simple but neat, the tiny stitches straight and strong. For a moment, his expression softened, and I thought just for a moment that he would let his son wear it. But then his wife leaned over his shoulder, glanced at the garment, and laughed lightly. "It's sweet, but it doesn't match the theme. We already picked out an outfit for him," Custom ordered. Her words carried far enough for those nearby to hear. A few guests smiled awkwardly, whispering behind their hands. My son quickly refolded the vest and placed it aside on a chair, where it slid down and half disappeared under the tablecloth. I stood frozen, the humiliation searing me from the inside. My eyes darted to the bassinet, where my grandson kicked happily, oblivious to the storm around him. He wore a crisp new shirt, suspenders, and shiny shoes clothes that shouted wealth and modernity. My handmade vest looked like a relic beside them. Later, when the candles were lit and the cameras flashed, I stood at the back of the room. Guests clapped and cheered as my son and his wife leaned over the cake together, guiding their son's small hands. The photographer called for grandparents to join the picture. My daughter-in-law's parents were ushered forward, smiling broadly as they lifted the boy between them. The crowd cheered again, the cameras snapped. No one called my name. I waited, my palms damp, my heart pounding. Surely, someone would notice. Surely my son would turn, would beckon me forward. But he did not. He smiled for the camera, his arm around his wife, his child in his in-laws' arms. The moment stretched endlessly, the flashes blinding, the laughter sharp. When the crowd dispersed, I slipped out quietly, leaving the cake untouched on a side table, the vest still folded beneath the chair. The sun outside had dipped low, casting long, cruel shadows across the street. I walked slowly, each step heavier than the last, until I reached a quiet bench beneath a tree. There, I sat with my empty hands, staring at the dust dancing in the golden light. And the thought that clawed its way into my chest was one I could no longer push aside. They did not simply forget me. They wanted me invisible. Autumn arrived with the scent of roasted chestnuts on street corners and the rustle of yellow leaves sweeping through gutters. It should have been a season of warmth, of gathering around tables and giving thanks. But in my chest there was only a hollow echo, a tightening grief that no amount of prayer seemed to ease. When the invitation came for the annual mid-autumn family dinner, I hesitated. It had been years since I'd missed one, but this time my hands trembled as I unfolded the envelope. The gathering would be at my son's home. My first thought was joy I would see my grandson again. My second was dread another stage for my humiliation. Still, I went. What mother could willingly stay away? I baked mooncakes the night before, kneading lotus paste with aching hands, pressing each round into the old wooden mold my own mother had used. The smell of golden crust filled my small kitchen, flooding me with memories of laughter long past. I wrapped them carefully, placed them in a tin, and clutched it as though it were a shield. Their apartment gleamed when I arrived. Lanterns swayed in the courtyard, children raced about with sparklers, and laughter rose like a tide. I stepped inside to the hum of voices, the clatter of chopsticks, the sparkle of wine glasses. My daughter-in-law moved gracefully among the guests, her dress immaculate, her smile effortless. My son followed behind her, carrying dishes, pouring drinks. I stood at the threshold for a moment, feeling invisible. Then I took a deep breath and entered. "Mother," my son said, spotting me. His voice was warm enough to steady me. He took the tin from my hands. "You made these?" "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "Lotus seed paste, like when you were little." He opened the tin and the sweet scent wafted out. For a heartbeat, I saw his eyes soften, the boy I once knew shining through. But then his wife appeared at his side, glancing at the mooncakes as though they were relics of a forgotten age. "We already have desserts catered," she said, her tone smooth, her smile tight. "Sugar-free, organic, healthier for everyone." My son closed the tin quickly, nodding in agreement. "We'll save these for later," he murmured. The tin was set aside on a sideboard, out of reach, out of sight. Dinner began. Long tables groaned under platters of food. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, chopsticks tapped porcelain. I found a seat near the end, far from the center where my son and his wife presided like royalty. My grandson sat in a high chair beside them, chewing on a rice cake, his little hands sticky. Each time he laughed, my heart clenched tighter. I wanted to rise, to walk to him, to wipe his mouth, to feed him a spoonful of soup. But every time I moved, my daughter-in-law's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and warning. I stayed seated, my hands gripping my napkin until it tore. Then came the moment that sealed my shame. The host called for a toast, inviting the grandparents to stand with the child beneath the lanterns. My daughter-in-law's parents rose immediately, proud and glowing. They lifted my grandson between them, the guests clapping, cameras flashing. The child laughed, waving his small arms as the lantern light bathed his face. I rose halfway, my heart leaping, waiting for my son to beckon me forward. But he did not. He kept his gaze on the ground, his smile frozen. Someone at the table whispered, "Where's his other grandmother?" "She's not involved much," my daughter-in-law answered smoothly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. "Not involved." The words struck harder than any slap. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling, my vision blurred. I heard the applause, the laughter, the click of cameras capturing a memory from which I had been erased. Later, when dessert was served, I noticed the tin of mooncake still on the sideboard, untouched, forgotten. A child reached for it, curious, but his mother pulled him away, murmuring something about old-fashioned sweets. I slipped out before the evening ended. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and smoke from sparklers. Lanterns bobbed above me, glowing like distant moons. I walked alone, clutching nothing but my empty hands. And as I moved through the darkened streets, the question pressed harder, sharper. If I am not welcome at their table, not present in their photographs, not trusted with their child, am I still a mother? Or have I become nothing more than a shadow they endure? Winter crept into the city, settling frost onto window panes and wrapping every breath in a white veil. My small rented room grew colder each night, the old heater sputtering, but the chill inside my chest came not from weather, it came from absence, the absence of my son's voice, the absence of my grandson's laughter, the absence of my name at their table. Weeks passed with no invitation, no call. I told myself not to wait by the phone, but every evening I sat with my hands folded in my lap, straining at every vibration, hoping it might be them. The silence became its own cruel language. Then one afternoon, as I walked back from the market with a small bag of mandarins, I saw them. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandson, bundled in bright scarves, stepping out of a cafe. They were laughing, cheeks flushed from warmth and cocoa, the boy perched high on his father's shoulders. I froze on the sidewalk, half hidden by the crowd. For a moment I almost called out. But then I heard her voice, clear and sharp above the noise of traffic. "Remember, we're not telling her. It's simpler this way." The words sliced through me. Not telling who? Not telling me what. They passed without seeing me, disappearing into a car that gleamed like a mirror. I stood motionless, the mandarins heavy in my bag, the question heavier still. That night, I turned the moment over and over in my mind. What secret were they keeping? Why the need for silence? The answer came unexpectedly a week later. a distant cousin, always too fond of gossip, visited me with a basket of dried fruits. She spoke of family matters between sips of tea, her tongue quick and careless. "Your daughter-in-law is very capable," she said. "I heard she even had documents drawn up papers to make sure the child's upbringing is entirely under her control. Smart woman, really. She knows how to protect her territory." My stomach tightened. "What documents?" I asked, though my throat was dry. "Oh, you know," she waved her hand. "Custody preferences, guardianship guidelines, things young families do nowadays. They say you shouldn't get too close. Old-fashioned ways are considered harmful." She lowered her voice, leaning closer. "Some say she's planning to move far away. Another city, maybe abroad. But hush, that might just be rumor." The room spun. "Move away? Cut me off completely?" After she left, I sat alone with the silence, my chest aching. The papers I had glimpsed weeks earlier now took on a new terrifying shape. This was not mere caution, it was strategy. She was drawing a map where I did not exist. In the days that followed, I began to notice things I had ignored before. The way neighbors avoided my eyes when they spoke of my son, the way invitations to gatherings no longer arrived at my door. The way my grandson's photos appeared on relatives' phone celebrations I had never been told about. One evening, when courage overcame fear, I dialed my son's number. It rang and rang, until at last he answered. "Hello, Mom," he said, his voice rushed. "Are you moving?" I asked without preamble. Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Then a sigh. "Who told you that? Is it true?" My voice cracked. "Are you taking him away from me?" "It's not like that," he murmured. "We're considering opportunities. For his future. Better schools, better environment. And where do I fit in that future?" I whispered. Another pause. Then quietly, "Mom, please don't make this harder than it is." The line went dead. I sat with the phone in my hand, the mandarins from days ago still sitting in their bag on the table, shriveled and forgotten. My sacrifices, my years, my love, all of it reduced to an inconvenience, a complication to be managed with signatures and distance. That night, I lay awake, the darkness pressing close. For the first time, I realized this was no misunderstanding, no clash of generations. This was deliberate. A plan unfolding, step by step, to erase me from my grandson's life entirely. And the cruelest cut of all, my son had agreed. The truth does not always crash down like a storm. Sometimes it seeps in drop by drop, like rain through a crack in the roof, until suddenly you realize the floor beneath you is flooded. That is how I began to see the shape of her plan, not in one dramatic discovery, but in fragments, each more devastating than the last. The first fragment came at the clinic. I had gone there for myself, just a persistent cough, the kind that rattled in my chest on cold mornings. The pediatric ward was one floor above the general practitioner's office. As I sat in the hallway waiting for my turn, I heard it. A baby's cry, sharp and familiar, muffled by the thin wall. Then came her voice, clear, commanding, impossible to mistake. "Yes, doctor," she was saying. "He becomes unsettled after certain visits, overstimulated. It disrupts his sleep for days." My stomach tightened. The doctor asked a question I could not hear clearly, and then she answered, her tone smooth as silk but edged with steel. "There is one person, his grandmother, who insists on loud songs, on old-fashioned ways. I know she means well, but it's toxic for him. We need it documented so the nanny and the school understand." Toxic. The word hit me like ice water down my back. I pressed my hand against the wall as though I could push the word back inside her mouth. The doctor's reply was professional, careful. "We don't usually name individuals. We describe conditions." "Then phrase it however you need to," she insisted. "Just make sure it's clear. Limited exposure to disruptive influences." A printer whirred. Papers rustled. My breath came shallow and fast. When the door opened, she stepped out first, elegant in a cream coat, carrying my grandson close against her chest. My son followed, holding the diaper bag. For an instant, his eyes met mine where I sat on the bench. His face went pale. "Mom," he murmured, almost too soft to hear. I wanted to rise, to reach for him, to demand an explanation, but she touched his arm, steering him forward. Neither of them stopped. Their footsteps faded down the hall, leaving me with the echoes of that single word, toxic. Later, when I stood to go, I noticed a scrap of paper near the printer tray. It had torn off when the machine jammed. On it were only a few lines, but enough to freeze my blood. Limit contact with known triggers. Maintain consistent routine. Avoid disruptive stimuli. Disruptive. That was me. The second fragment came from someone who had no idea he was betraying a confidence, the guard at their apartment complex. I had always greeted him politely over the years, sometimes bringing him tea in winter or fruit in summer. That day, when I approached, he gave me a look that was almost apologetic. "They've given us instructions," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "If you come, I'm supposed to call upstairs first." My throat went dry. "Instructions?" He shrugged, eyes sliding away. "Visitor rules. Authorized people only." He pulled a sheet of paper from a drawer as if searching for something else, but he placed it on the counter long enough for me to see. Apartment 6B. Authorized. Maternal grandparents. Authorized. Nanny service. Authorized. Grocery delivery. Special note. Limit access for non-listed relatives at parental request. Non-listed relatives. That was me too. I thanked him as if he had done me a kindness, and walked away before my legs could give out. The third fragment came through carelessness, my son's carelessness. Years ago, he had created a family group chat on his phone, adding cousins, his in-laws, me. The chat had long since gone quiet, except for the occasional forwarded greeting. I stayed in it anyway, though every message was a reminder of how far outside I had drifted. One evening, as I peeled ginger for soup, a notification appeared. It was a photo, my grandson at music class, cheeks puffed as he blew through a straw to keep a feather afloat. I smiled through tears, clutching the phone to my chest, but then another message came, a document forwarded by mistake. House rules quat, virgule, de. PDF. I should not have opened it, but my finger moved before I could think. The text scrolled before my eyes, a list of guidelines for caregivers. No food offered without parental approval. No physical contact unless pre-authorized. No unplanned visits. No mention of family disagreements in the child's presence. And at the very bottom, italicized. Avoid interactions with paternal grandmother when possible. If unavoidable, limit to less than 5 minutes, in public, with no physical contact. The phone slid from my hand and clattered onto the table. My chest heaved. The ginger lay forgotten, its scent sharp and bitter in the air. I had wondered for months if I was imagining it, if my pain came from misunderstandings, from small slights magnified by loneliness. But the truth was here in black and white, carefully drafted, updated like a policy manual. This was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Piece by piece, she had built a wall around my grandson. And my son, my boy, my blood had stood beside her, brick by brick, sealing me out. I sat in the silence of my room, the phone face down, the scrap of paper from the clinic tucked in a drawer, the guard's words echoing in my ears. Proof surrounded me now, undeniable. And as the night deepened, a question coiled tight inside me, heavy and poisonous. When love is rewritten as danger, when sacrifice is rebranded as disruption, what does a mother become? I did not sleep the night the rules found me. The words kept turning in the dark like fish in a net. No food, no touch, no unplanned visits, 5 minutes in public, and each time they surfaced, they took a piece of me with them. By dawn, the room had the paper gray color of exhaustion. I boiled water, set out tea I did not drink, and folded the scrap from the clinic into the smallest square it could be, as if shrinking paper might shrink pain. If the wall had been built in secret, then I would test it in daylight. I dressed with care, the way one dresses to visit a shrine, clean blouse, neat hair, a coat mended so skillfully you would not see the seam unless you knew where to look. On my way out, I tucked a mandarin into my pocket, the skin bright as a coin, the scent a small sun against winter's breath. My grandson loved to peel things. Even if I could not hold him, perhaps I could place the fruit in his hand and watch his fingers work the skin away in spirals. I did not go to their building. The guard would have to call, and I would be made to wait. Humiliation has a particular echo in a lobby. Instead, I went to the small park 2 blocks away, where mothers gathered in the late morning to let children conquer slides and make treaties in the sandbox. I had seen my daughter-in-law on that path before, pushing the stroller along the plum trees, composing the careful life she had chosen. Frost glazed the grass. The swings hung stiff as iron bells. A thin sun pushed through the cloud cover, insisting on a day. I sat on a bench near the sandbox, the mandarin warming in my palm, and watched the gate. They came when the church bells struck 10. My son carried the diaper bag. My daughter-in-law pushed the stroller. The baby wore a knit hat with a tiny pom-pom and mittens shaped like bear paws. He saw the sky and gurgled. He saw the pigeons and squealed. My heart rose to my throat and lodged there, a bright, hard thing that could neither be swallowed nor spit out. My daughter-in-law saw me first. The change in her face was almost imperceptible, a smoothing, like a hand wiped across a table, but I felt the temperature drop 2 degrees. She did not turn the stroller away, that would have been too obvious. She angled it so that if the wind shifted, I would catch the baby's profile, not his eyes. "Good morning," I said, rising. The words felt polite, civilian, as if we were neighbors speaking of weather. "Morning," my son murmured. "We were just leaving," she said. "It would be a shame," I replied, the smile set carefully on my face. "To waste such a day. He looks warm enough." I brought a fruit. I held up the mandarin not toward the baby, but toward my son. For later. My daughter-in-law's gaze dropped to the orange, then rose to my face, steady. "We don't do citrus yet," she said. "Acidity." "Of course." I slipped the mandarin back into my pocket. "Then let me stand a minute, and you can go on with your walk." My son shifted the bag on his shoulder, uncomfortable. "Mom, I won't touch him," I said gently. "I won't sing. 5 minutes, in public." I watched the words land. Her expression did not change, but he flinched. "House rules," I added softly, and his eyes darted to hers in panic, like a boy who has dropped a glass. She didn't ask how I knew. She did not need to. A wall does not interrogate the person standing outside. "We're in a hurry," she said. "We have an appointment." "With what?" I asked. I did not mean to. The question leapt out, small and hungry. "None of your business," she replied, and the civility peeled back for a heartbeat to show something blade, bright beneath. The baby made a soft questioning sound and reached a mitten toward the air. My body leaned, involuntary, the way a plant leans toward a window. I caught myself and pressed my hands together until the knuckles ached. "Walk with us to the gate," my son said suddenly, surprising us all. He looked at his wife. 3 minutes. She studied his face. The pause lasted only a breath, but I felt it as grace. "Fine," she said at last. 3. We moved like a new constellation. Stroller in front, my son by its side, me along the outer edge where the path meets the grass. Each step felt measured, rehearsed. From somewhere a child laughed. From somewhere a dog barked. A cold wind threaded needles through my coat. I tried to find a way to place words in this choreography that would not spoil it. "How is he sleeping?" I asked. "Through the night," she answered, clipped. "Does he like music?" "He attends a class." "Of course." I smiled at the baby, even though he could not see me. "Do you remember how your father learned to clap on the offbeat?" I said to the stroller, "Because it is sometimes easier to tell the truth to an object that cannot turn away." "Mom," my son said softly, a warning without teeth. "There is something else," I said. My voice found a calm I did not feel. "I will not ask how you drafted the rules. I will not ask why you taught the guard a list of names without mine. But I must ask this. Are you moving?" They did not look at each other. They did not need to. They were practiced now in speaking from a single throat. "There are opportunities," she said. "We're exploring them." "Where?" My mouth was dry. "Another district? Another country?" "Wherever is best for him," she answered, and did not add for whom it would be worst. We reached the gate. My 3 minutes were over. I placed my hands in my pockets to keep them from lifting of their own accord, to keep them from doing what they had done all my life, offering, soothing, holding. The mandarin pressed against my fingers like an unspent word. "I will not make a scene," I said, looking at my son, "but I will ask for one thing." He nodded without commitment, the way you nod to a street musician after passing by without dropping a coin. "Let me know when you decide," I said. "I cannot stop you from leaving, but do not allow me to discover it from a gossip or a photo of a new apartment sent to the family chat as if I am a billboard you no longer pass." He swallowed. "I'll try." "Try is what children say when they are not sure they will do it," I replied. "You are a father." We stood there a moment, the three of us and the child who did not know he was the axis of a small planet. Then, because it is easier to end a conversation with motion than with words, she eased the stroller forward. My son followed. The gate clicked shut between us. I stayed at the park until my knees complained and the pigeons lost interest in my stillness. On the way home I bought nothing, as if even bread would be a betrayal of the way hunger had become a language I knew by heart. That evening, I did what I had not done for a long time. I called my sister. She lives 2 buses and a stubborn hill away, in a building that smells like boiled cabbage and warmed varnish. We had fallen out years before over something that seemed enormous then and foolish now, a dispute about funeral costs, a phrase spoken too sharply when grief sat between us. I dialed her number with the clumsy hope of someone trying a key in a lock that may have been changed. She answered on the 4th ring. "Who is this?" "It's me," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I expected. There was a silence so textured I could hear what she was not saying, then a sigh. "I wondered when you would call." We met the next day in the tear room beneath her building, a place that had not changed its curtains since the year our mother died. The owner still used a kettle that sounded like a train arriving, and the tea still tasted the way time does when it sits too long in a cupboard flat, then suddenly sweet if you let it. "You look thin," my sister said, which is how some people say I missed you. "You look like our mother," I answered, which is how I said it back. We spoke around the wound at first, her knees, my landlord, the price of fish. Then I told her everything, the clinic, the guard, the house rules, the park, the talk of moving. I did not dramatize. I set the evidence on the table between us, the way we used to set shells we'd found at the river, comparing their ridges and their scars. She listened without interrupting, which is how she apologizes. When I finished, she closed her eyes, pressed her fingers to her lids, as if rearranging something behind them. "She is shutting the door," she said, "and he is holding it closed." "I know," I said. "But why so completely? Why cut the rope all the way through?" "Control is a hunger," she replied. "Some people feed it bread, some feed it bone." We sat a while in the old tea smell, in the old sister silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder, the kind used for school reports. "A friend at the district office," she said, not looking up. "Her niece attends the same early learning center. Your grandson is scheduled to start next term. She brought me this because she thought—" My sister cleared her throat. "Because she thought you should see." Inside the folder was a photocopy of a registration form, the ink slightly blurred by a machine that needed cleaning. The child's name was printed in neat block letters. Under emergency contacts were 2 numbers that were not mine. Under authorized pickup persons, the list ended after the nanny service and the maternal grandparents. In the margin, a note in tight handwriting, "Per parent's request, no release to non-listed relatives. See attached parental directive." There was no attached directive in the folder. I did not need it. I had read versions of it in my sleep. I ran my finger over the child's name as if it were braille, as if raised letters could become skin. "How did she—" My sister shrugged. "People can write what they want if they are confident enough when they hand it over. She is very confident. She has reason." We looked at each other. We share a face that has our mother's stubbornness built into the bones. "What do I do?" I asked. She poured more tea we would not drink. "If you cannot push the door," she said, "you can stand where they want to step next." "I don't want a fight in a school corridor," I said. "I don't want my grandson to learn my name as a warning." "Then do not fight," she said, "but do not vanish." The kettle sighed. Below the window, a boy walked a dog that pulled him like a kite. I folded the photocopy back into the folder, slid it into my bag, and felt the old, familiar anchor of a plan begin to form the kind that grows not from fury but from the slow, careful muscle of a mother who has had to make do all her life. 3 days later, I stood outside the early learning center just before dismissal. I wore my coat and my calm, and nothing else that could be mistaken for threat. Parents gathered like birds, in winter colors, speaking softly into scarves. Through the glass I saw small heads bobbing, a teacher fastening tiny zippers, a boy laughing from his belly, as if laughter were the first language he had learned. They came late, as they often did. My daughter-in-law in her perfect coat, my son with the same hollow behind his eyes, the nanny a step behind, efficient. The director met them at the door with a friendly nod. Papers changed hands. The curated life moved forward on polished casters. I did not step toward them. I did not speak. I stood where they would have to see me as they passed, not close enough to claim contact, not far enough to be erased by a glance. When their eyes flicked across the crowd, they found me. My daughter-in-law's mouth tightened. My son's steps stuttered for a beat, then resumed. As they drew level, I did the smallest thing a person can do and still call it an act. I reached into my pocket, took out the mandarin, and rolled it gently along the low brick wall so that it came to rest by the stroller wheel. The baby saw the flash of orange and made a delighted sound that clapped my ribs from the inside. The nanny bent automatically, picked up the fruit, and looked to the mother for instruction. "No," my daughter-in-law said. "Not from her." The nanny placed the mandarin back on the wall, midway between the stroller and where I stood, an orange sun setting between two countries. My son looked at the fruit. He looked at me. The space of a heartbeat opened, a place where a choice could live. Then the gate buzzed, a car honked, the city shouted its chores, and the moment shrank. He pushed the stroller on. The mandarin stayed. I did not move until the crowd thinned, and the last zipper had been fastened, and the last mitten tugged straight. Then I picked up the fruit and set it on the school's little free table, where someone had left a pair of mittens without a match and a book with a torn cover. The sign said, "Take what you need." I placed the mandarin there as if obeying a law deeper than house rules. On my way home, the winter light silvered the river. In the reflection I saw a woman who was not a ghost, not yet. She had weight. She cast a shadow. She could be seen if someone remembered to look. That night, I sat with the folder open on my lap and the clinic scrap beside it and the memory of the guard's list in my head, and I understood that revelation was not a single bell, but a chorus. A dozen small ringing things that, together, name a doom. I blew out the candle and spoke into the dark so softly the walls would keep my secret. "I will not storm your gates, but I will be standing when you step outside them." And somewhere between that promise and sleep, a new thought bloomed with a terrible, tender brightness. What if the door she has locked from the inside is the same door he will someday need to escape? I did not know yet how to turn that thought into action. I only knew that the next morning, I would begin. The snow had just begun to melt, leaving the sidewalks slick with patches of ice and dirty water, when the confrontation I had dreaded and perhaps unconsciously awaited finally came. It did not arrive as a grand event, but as something small, domestic, ordinary, a community gathering at the neighborhood hall, organized for families with young children. I had not planned to attend, but a neighbor, unaware of my fractured ties, mentioned that my son and his wife would be there with the baby. My heart ached at the thought of watching from the shadows, yet something inside me whispered, "You must go. You must see for yourself what they are trying to erase you from." The hall smelled of steamed buns and damp coats, of crayons crushed into paper and spilled tea. Children darted through the aisles, faces flushed, their laughter echoing against the low ceiling. I found a seat at the very back, clutching my scarf tightly, the wool scratchy against my neck. And then I saw them. She entered first, radiant as always, her coat belted neatly, her smile already rehearsed for the parents who rushed to greet her. Behind her came my son, his shoulders hunched, carrying the baby against his chest. My grandson was larger now, with round cheeks and bright eyes that widened at the crowd. He clapped his mittened hands, delighted by the noise. My heart clenched so hard I thought it might give way. I stayed seated, forcing myself not to rise, not to run forward as instinct demanded. Instead, I watched as they joined a circle of parents near the front. The program began. Songs, stories, games. My grandson giggled when the storyteller shook a rattle and I could not stop the tears that burned my eyes. Then came the moment that turned a quiet ache into a public wound. The organizer announced a group photograph. "All the grandparents, please. Come join your families in front." Chairs scraped. Elderly men and women stood, shuffling forward with smiles wide and proud. I rose halfway, my hands trembling, my legs stiff. But before I could take a step, I heard her voice clear, ringing, meant to be overheard. "Only his maternal grandparents are here." I froze. A hush fell around me, subtle but unmistakable. People glanced back, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. My son's face flushed, his mouth opened, then closed again. He did not correct her. He did not say my name. I sank back into my chair as the photograph was taken. My grandson sat on his other grandparents' laps, the flash capturing a moment that excluded me as neatly as if I had never existed. The humiliation seared through me, but it was not the worst of it. The worst came afterward, when the crowd began to disperse and I remained frozen in my seat. My son walked past me, his gaze flicking briefly in my direction. There was something there, regret perhaps, or shame, but it lasted no more than a heartbeat. He kept walking, his wife at his side, her hand on his arm, her chin lifted as though she had won a prize. I stayed until the hall emptied, until the smell of steamed buns faded into cold air. My scarf slipped from my shoulders, pooling in my lap, but I did not move to retrieve it. Because in that moment, I understood this was no longer a private battle, hidden within the walls of their apartment. This was a declaration, made in front of the community, that I did not belong. Yet humiliation carries its own strange clarity. As I sat there, the sting of shame cooling into resolve, I realized that what she wanted most was silence, my absence, my erasure. And that, I thought with sudden certainty, I could not give her. For the first time in months, my grief bent into something harder, sharper, not fury, not yet, but the seed of defiance. A quiet vow whispered beneath my breath as I gathered my scarf, stood, and walked out into the thin winter sun. You may lock your doors, you may write your rules, you may even turn my son's face from mine, but I am still here, and I will not vanish. The community hall incident should have broken me. For days afterward I could hardly eat. I moved through my room like a shadow, folding and refolding the same blanket, staring at the kettle as though its boiling could answer the question that throbbed in my chest. How did love rot into this? But grief is a strange creature. It gnaws, it wounds, but sometimes it sharpens too. By the end of the week, the humiliation at the photograph no longer sat as raw pain. It had hardened into resolve. If they wanted me erased, then I needed to know why not the excuses about boundaries or modern parenting, but the truth beneath the truth. That chance came one evening, colder than most, when I decided to walk past their building. I told myself it was only to see the lights glowing in the windows, to imagine my grandson asleep in his little bed. But as I turned the corner, I saw them. My son and his wife stepping out of a car, arms full of shopping bags. They hadn't seen me, so I slipped into the shadow of a tree, heart hammering. They argued softly as they walked. I could not hear every word, but one phrase carried clear in the night air. "If she contests it," my daughter-in-law said sharply. "She won't," my son murmured. My breath caught. "Contests what?" They entered the building, the door slamming shut behind them. I stood frozen until my fingers turned numb from the cold. Then I left, questions pounding in my skull. A few days later, I found the answer. Or rather, it found me. It came from the guard again, the same weary man who once showed me the visitor list. That morning, he leaned out of his booth as I passed. "You didn't hear this from me," he muttered, sliding a folded slip of paper onto the counter. "She dropped it yesterday by mistake. Picked it up again, but not before I saw the header. Thought you should know what game you're in." I hesitated, then took it. My hands shook as I unfolded the scrap. It wasn't much, just the corner of a letterhead, the words, "Family Court Preliminary Petition for Sole Grandparental Access Restrictions." The letters blurred before my eyes. Sole. Restrictions. Court. I stumbled back to my room, my legs trembling, the walls pressing in. That night I could not sleep, and in the darkness my mind replayed every humiliation with cruel clarity. The birthday where my gift lay ignored under the chair. The family dinner where I was told to keep distance. The photograph where I was erased. None of it was accidental. It was a case being built piece by piece, moment by moment, until even strangers could be convinced I was unfit. But the deepest cut came the next morning, when I opened my phone. A message had slipped into the family group chat, perhaps by mistake, perhaps by carelessness. It was forwarded from my daughter-in-law to her parents. "Everything is proceeding. Once it's official, she'll have no standing. We won't have to worry anymore." Attached was a draft document, its text visible in the preview, House Rules V5, 1, finalized for submission. My breath came shallow. My son had seen this, approved this, and still he had not spoken to me. The twist was not only that she wanted me gone, It was that he, my son, my only child, was willing to let it happen. I set the phone down, staring at it as though it might burn through the table. My reflection looked back from the black screen, a face lined with years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of quiet endurance. And for the first time, I wondered if the love I thought unbreakable had been nothing more than a chain I forged alone, dragging it behind me while he learned how to walk away. That night, I whispered into the silence of my room, "They are not only taking him from me, they are teaching him that I never mattered." The kettle hissed, the window rattled in the wind, and inside my chest, something fragile faith, perhaps finally cracked. The letter arrived on a Thursday, slipped through the gap beneath my door like a blade. It bore the court's crest and a stamped date that sat on the page like a stone. I boiled water I did not drink, and read every word until the paragraphs blurred and swam. Preliminary petition, restrictions, best interests of the child. I traced the ink with a fingertip the way one traces the edge of a wound, surprised to find it both sharp and familiar. They had given new names to things I already knew. Boundaries renamed banishment, prudence renamed punishment. By afternoon, I had folded the letter into 3 careful parts and slid it into the pocket of my coat next to the paper crane I had kept since the day in the rain. I put on my mended shoes, the ones that made no noise on stairwells, and walked to their building because there are days when a mother must knock on the door that keeps her out and say her piece before the light changes. The guard saw me and did not reach for the phone. He looked at my face a long time and then lowered his eyes, as if the rules could not bear witness to what a human gaze might still understand. "5th floor," he said hoarsely. "They're in." The hallway smelled of detergent and the high, sweet note of baby lotion. I could hear music behind another door, a kettle somewhere coming to the point of frenzy. When my knuckles struck their wood, the sound felt smaller than the silence that followed. Then the latch turned. My daughter-in-law opened the door. She wore a black sweater that fit her like certainty. Behind her, the apartment looked like a page in a magazine. Plants that did not know dust, books that formed perfect spines, a small train set coiled on a low rug like a tamed animal. My grandson's laugh burst once from the bedroom and then softened, as if joy too had learned to speak in measured tones. "We're busy," she said, though she left the door wide enough for a person to pass. "Then this will be brief," I answered. I kept my voice even, the way you do when carrying a bowl brimmed with hot water. She did not move, but my son slid into the doorway beside her, tie loosened, hair uncombed in the weary way of men who spend their strength on the wrong battles. He saw the letter in my hand and closed his eyes for a moment like someone taking a wave full in the face. "Come in, Mom," he said quietly. I stepped past them into the entry where my umbrella once leaned and my thermos once cooled, and the vest I had sewn slid from a chair without anyone bending to pick it up. The air inside held the exact temperature of a decision already made. "Where is he?" I asked. "In his room," my daughter-in-law said. "He's napping." From the bedroom came a soft, sleep-drunk sound, the pliant hum of a child turning over a dream. "I will not wake him," I said. "I have come to speak to you, not to borrow his hand for proof that I belong." My son gestured to the table. Papers lay there in a neat, threatening stack, guidelines polished to V5. 1. A schedule that parceled hours into obedient squares, a printout whose header matched the stamp in my pocket. He put his palm over the stack, as if paper were a creature that might leap up and bite. "Please," he murmured. "Let's sit." We did not sit. The room was a geometry problem with no honest solution. The 3 of us stood in a triangle that felt like the shape of a trap. "I received your letter," I said, though it was not theirs, not signed by their hands, but written by their will. "It says you would like the law to call me a danger." "It does not say danger," my daughter-in-law replied evenly. "It says limitation, clarity. The law is not a dictionary," I said. "It is a blade. It either cuts or it does not." My son rubbed the side of his neck. The old boys tell that he had been caught in a falsehood even if he had spoken none. "Mom," he said, "this is for his routine. He needs consistency. He wakes up at night for days after you visit. He gets overstimulated." The word was the exact temperature of the clinic hallway. "I am not a strobe light," I said. "I am his grandmother." "You sing loudly," my daughter-in-law said. "You insist on feeding him things we don't approve. You show up without warning. We have asked you to respect our methods." "I have fed him nothing but what I have fed my own child, who lived," I said. I have shown up because you closed every door that had a time written on it. I have sung because silence is what kills." Her mouth twitched. "There it is," she said softly. "The ledger. The sacrifices you recite like a prayer." "No," I replied, finding a steadiness that surprised me. "Not a ledger. A map. I am telling you where I walked so you would know the ground you stand on. We might have stayed there forever, circling the same 4 words: routine, respect, boundaries, love, until they meant nothing but sound, if not for the quietest noise in the apartment. The soft click of a bedroom door opening a finger's width. A small face appeared in the crack, warm with sleep, hair damp and standing like grass after rain. My grandson looked at the 3 giants in his living room and blinked. He lifted one mittened hand in the air as if conducting a room of silent instruments. I did not move. It cost me everything I had ever learned about staying and going not to kneel, not to open my arms to the shape my body had been making since the day I learned to be a mother. The room went breathless. "Back to bed, sweetheart," my daughter-in-law said gently, her voice carrying the honey she never gave to me. My grandson considered the order. Then he took one step into the light. His mitten fell off as if choosing a side. His palm opened and closed, a small sea creature testing air. "Don't," my son said, but he said it to me, not to him. I reached into my coat and found the paper crane with one hand and the court letter with the other. In one palm, a child's toy made of a scrap left over from a day of rain. In the other, the shape of my erasure typed in a font that had no love in it. I placed the letter on the table. I put the crane on the floor, at the place where his bare hand might reach without crossing anyone's rules. "Do you see this?" I asked them both, voice unshaking now. "This is everything I am to you divided into 2 piles. In one pile, documents that tell strangers how to keep me from a child who bears my blood. In the other, a small bird that cannot fly but remembers the idea of wings." "Mom," my son said, something cracking under the syllable. "Say it," I told him. "If you believe this is right, say it with your full mouth and your full name. Do not hide behind her grammar." He looked at the letter and then at me, and then at the small hand opening and closing near the floor where the crane waited. He tried to stand on 2 boats at once and felt, perhaps for the first time, the water. "I'm trying to keep peace," he whispered. "Peace built on my silence is not peace," I said. "It is a museum where you keep the things you are too ashamed to throw away." My daughter-in-law's eyes flashed. "We don't owe you suffering as tribute to your past," she said. "He is our child." "He is," I agreed. "He is also someone else's grandson. When he asks you later, because children always ask, 'Where did the other woman go? The one whose face I knew like weather?' What will you say? That you wrote her out like a correction in red ink? That you filed her heart under disruptive?" She drew breath to respond, but before she could, the smallest sound in the room unfolded again. My grandson stepped forward and knelt unsteady, brave, and touched the paper bird with the tip of one finger. His touch was careful, the way children touch ants and miracles. The crane shifted. He looked up at me. "Don't," my son said again, hoarse, but there was nothing left in the word to stop. "I won't," I told him. "I won't touch him. I will keep your rules, right down to their cruelty. I will sing with my mouth closed and love with my hands at my sides. But hear me." The room narrowed until it was only my voice and the sound of my own blood. "If the court asks me what I want, I will not say rights. I will say time. 20 minutes at a park bench. 10, if 20 frightens you. I will say names. Mine in his ear, not as a warning but as a place. I will say truth. That a boy is made of many doors, and the ones you lock now are the ones he must later learn to open with pain. I will say mercy. Not for me. For him, so that he need not learn to step over a woman who would die to hand him a mandarin." "Stop," my son said, and the word broke. "Please. Please, Mom." "Then you stop," I said, and the quiet after had a gravity I had not felt since the day he first breathed. "Stop calling this protection when it is fear. Stop calling this modern when it is mean. Stop borrowing the law to do the work your mouth will not own." The baby lifted the crane to his ear as if it were a shell. He laughed small, incredulous, the world's first joke rediscovered. My daughter-in-law moved then, swift and precise. She scooped him from the floor and the crane dropped, skidding beneath the couch like something wild that knew where to hide. She did not look at me when she spoke. This conversation is over. For now, I said. The court will begin another, and when it does, I will not present a list of what you have done to me. I will present a photograph you do not own yet. Him at 12, at 15, at 20, learning the shape of absence and giving it the name you taught him. I will say to the judge that children grow large inside the spaces we leave. Do not make that space my outline. My son's shoulders sagged as if the tie itself weighed 100 stones. He stared at the letter, then at the line where the crane had vanished, then at his boy who had put his ear where music used to be. When he finally spoke, his voice was the voice he used as a child when a nightmare showed him a door without a handle. I don't know how, he said. I know, I answered, and the tenderness in my own words startled me. You were never taught. I am trying to teach you now, at the edge of what I am allowed. The baby began to fuss, sensing weather without knowing its name. My daughter-in-law rocked on her heels, looking anywhere but at me. The clock on the microwave changed its blue digits with the indifference of machines. I picked up the court letter and slid it back into my coat. I left the place on the table where it had been as empty as a missing tooth. I will go, I said, because a mother must choose the minutes to leave the way she once chose the hours to stay. I have said what I came to say. You will do what you have planned to do. The law will sit between us like a small, clever person and take notes. At the door, I paused and looked back once, the way people do when they suspect a room may never see them again. One last thing, I said. When he is old enough to ask why I wasn't there, do not say I didn't come. Say I came too often for your comfort. Say I stood at the gate until the soles of my shoes learned its mettle. Say I was inconvenient in exactly the way love is, daily, ordinary, and unwilling to die just because it is told to. I stepped into the corridor. The latch lifted behind me and then landed. The hallway returned to its breath and its detergent and the far-off hiss of someone else's kettle. I walked down 5 flights, and through a lobby where the guard studied nothing in particular. Outside, the afternoon had the tired color of old tin. I crossed the street carefully and sat on the bench where the bus comes when it remembers. Only then did I realize my hands were shaking. I folded them under my thighs the way I used to when I needed them to be still. The bus arrived and left and arrived again. I did not move. A child on the opposite sidewalk pointed at a stray dog and named it loudly, as though naming could give it a collar. When the sky began to pull the light down like a curtain, I stood. I walked home along the river where the water wore its winter face and geese made small decisions together. In my room, I set the kettle on and opened the window an inch to let in air cold enough to hurt. I knelt and reached under my own couch and found nothing there to lift into the light. I lit a candle anyway. The flame steadied after a tremor. I put my palm above it until the heat became unbearable, and then pulled back, which is another way a body learns its limits. In the small circle of brightness, I could see all the shapes of what had just happened, pleas sharpened to knives, rules polished to glass, a child laughing into a folded bird, and I understood why the heart wants to break, not to end itself, but to make more room. I whispered his name, not my son's, the smaller one. I said it once the way you say a prayer you are not sure you believe, and once the way you say water when you are alone in a room with thirst. Then I blew out the candle and let the dark sit with me like an honest friend. The morning after the confrontation, I woke to silence so heavy it seemed the air itself refused to move. My body ached, as if the words I had spoken had weight, as if every syllable I forced into that apartment had left a bruise inside my ribs. The letter still lay on my table, folded neatly, its edges sharp as though to remind me that paper can cut more deeply than steel. I boiled tea, though I could not taste it. I sat by the window, watching children on their way to school, their scarves flapping like small flags of joy. None of them belonged to me. None of them carried my grandson's eyes or my son's gait. I told myself not to cry, but tears are disobedient things. They came anyway, slow and stubborn, carving lines down my cheeks that no hand would wipe away. By noon, word had spread. My sister called first, her voice steady but low. "You did it," she said. "You stood before them. And now?" "Now," I answered, staring at the court letter. "Now we wait for the law to decide if love can be filed away as noise." Later, the building guard found me in the alley, where I sometimes fed stray cats. He cleared his throat awkwardly, avoiding my eyes. "She asked me to make sure you don't linger at the entrance anymore," he said, shifting from one foot to the other. "But I didn't see you here today, understand?" I nodded, even as my throat burned. Once again, I was becoming invisible by decree. That evening, I walked to the park. The benches were slick with frost, the swings creaking in the cold wind. I sat anyway, clutching a thermos of broth, and stared at the playground. I imagined my grandson climbing the slide, laughing as he stumbled down, turning to look for someone who should have been waiting with open arms. But in my vision, no one was there. The days that followed were slow, each one a small echo of the last. I avoided their building, though every instinct screamed at me to go. I avoided calling, though my fingers hovered over the phone each night. Instead, I lived inside silence, waiting for some crack, some sign. The sign came not from them, but from the world outside. At the market, I overheard two women talking by the vegetable stall. One of them mentioned a young couple, planning to relocate, better schools, better future for the child, she said. My chest clenched. I didn't need to ask which couple she meant. The gossip was true. They were preparing to leave, perhaps to another city, perhaps further. Each rumor carved another piece out of me, until I felt like nothing but fragments. One evening, when the loneliness pressed too hard, I unfolded the court letter again. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to read every line slowly. Restrictions, limitations, best interests of the child. Not a single word about grandmothers, not a single word about sacrifices. No line where I could write, "She sold her earrings to buy her son shoes." She skipped meals so he could eat. She sang lullabies that carried him through nights of fever. I realized then that the law knew nothing of mothers. The kettle whistled, and I poured water into my cup, though I could not drink. I stared at the steam rising and whispered, "If they take him far away, will he forget my face? Will he forget the sound of my voice before it ever had the chance to belong to him?" The room gave no answer. Only the steam rose, curled, and vanished. And yet, beneath the despair, something else stirred a seed of defiance. They could take him from my arms, from my photographs, from my daily life. But they could not erase the truth of what I had done, of who I was. They could not rewrite the history of the woman who carried him, even if they tried to bury her under words like toxic and disruptive. I lit a candle on my table, small against the dark. Its flame trembled, but it stayed. I leaned close and whispered into it, as though the fire itself could carry my vow across distances no court could legislate. I will not vanish, not while he breathes the same air, not while my name still beats inside my chest. The wax dripped slowly, a quiet metronome counting the seconds of my resolve. Outside, the city carried on, trains rattling, horns blaring, people laughing. But inside that room, with nothing but a candle and my vow, I felt something take root. This was no longer only about loss, it was about witness. If they forced me to live outside the circle, I would not go quietly into the shadows. I would remain close enough for the child to someday see me standing there and ask, "Who is she?" And when that day came, no law, no petition, no polished words could stop the truth from walking out of my mouth. The day of their departure was not announced to me, yet I felt it before I knew it. Some truths arrive that way, through the air, through the way light falls differently, through the absence of sound where there should be laughter. It was early spring. The snow had melted into gray slush, and the sidewalks were wet with the season's reluctant thaw. I walked past their building almost by instinct, my feet carrying me without permission. The guard gave me a long look but said nothing. His silence was its own warning. Outside the entrance, suitcases stood lined in a row, gleaming and new. A car idled at the curb, its trunk open wide like a mouth ready to swallow everything. My daughter-in-law came first, heels sharp against the pavement, her face composed and flawless as ever. Behind her, movers carried boxes marked with thick black letters, toys, books, kitchen. And then I saw them, my son with his coat unbuttoned, my grandson in his arms, bundled against the cold. The boy's cheeks were rosy, his eyes wide as he pointed toward the pigeons scattering across the sidewalk. He laughed, a sound so pure it cut me in two. I stood across the street, half hidden by a tree whose branches still wore winter's bareness. My heart thundered in my chest. I wanted to run forward, to throw myself at them, to plead. But my body stayed rooted, as though the earth itself held me back. For one fragile moment, my grandson's eyes found me. He stilled, his laughter fading into a curious silence. He tilted his head, as if trying to place the face of a woman who lingered always at the edges. His small hand lifted in the air, opening and closing like a wave. My son turned quickly, following his gaze. When he saw me, his face tightened regret, fear, love, shame, all tangled into one expression he could not hold for long. My daughter-in-law glanced too, her eyes narrowing, her jaw firm. She said something I could not hear, sharp enough to pull him back. He shifted the child higher in his arms, turning his small body away from me. I pressed my palm against the tree bark, grounding myself in its roughness. My throat burned, but no sound came. I watched as they loaded the last of the boxes, as the trunk closed, as my son buckled my grandson into the car seat with careful hands. The car door shut with a hollow thud. The engine rumbled. The pigeons scattered again. I wanted to shout, to cry his name, to run across the street and beat my fists against the glass. Instead, I stayed still. I stayed silent. Because love, I realized, is not always loud. Sometimes it is endurance. Sometimes it is the refusal to vanish, even when you are forced outside the frame. As the car pulled away, my grandson pressed his small hand against the window. I do not know if it was for me, or for the pigeons, or for the world moving past him, but I chose to believe it was for me. The car turned the corner and disappeared. The street grew quiet again, as if nothing had happened. Only the faint smell of exhaust lingered, sharp and bitter in the thawing air. I stood there until my legs trembled, until the guard looked away out of mercy, until the sun dipped lower and the shadows lengthened. Then I walked home slowly, each step heavy, each breath filled with a question that had no answer. That night, I lit the candle again. Its flame flickered weakly, threatening to die, but it held on. I whispered into the stillness, "Will he remember me? Or will I become nothing more than a story no one tells?" The flame bent, wavered, but did not go out. I leaned closer, my voice breaking as I asked the question that had haunted me all along. Does love still exist when it is not returned? The candle gave no answer. The room was silent. The night pressed close. And yet, even in that silence, I felt it the faintest thread of hope, thin as smoke, fragile as breath. Because somewhere out there, in a car heading toward a new life, a child had once looked at me, had once reached his hand into the air. And perhaps, just perhaps, one day he would remember.